Hello there and welcome to the Card Grotto. Today I'm using the Spellbinders 12 Days of Stitchmas Advent Calendar to create 2 cards using day 4. Before we open up the calendar, I'm just going to show you the Stitch Along add-on kit that can be purchased to work alongside the calendar, and I'm using it on my cards today. So inside the kit you get lots of lovely sheets of Spellbinders cardstock. The colour theme this year is teals, blues, aquas, a little bit of green and then some pink and red tones. There is also another sheet of red cardstock. I'm just bringing it in here. I've already cut mine down to use on my projects, but it does come as a full-size sheet. There's also some black and white cardstock and then also some gold and silver cardstock as well. There is a sentiment stamp set in the kit. There are some needles. These are blunt needles, which personally I really appreciate. There are some embellishments, so there are some pearls and then some aqua gems, really very pretty. And then lots of lovely thread. So there are 2 rolls of DMC diamond metallic thread. There's the gold and the white, and I'm using both of these on my cards today. And then there's also lots of lovely DMC floss. The colours coordinate with the colours of the cardstock in the kit. So there are some solid colours and then also some variegated colours. Unfortunately, just because of the design of my cards and the die that I'm using today, I didn't end up using this, but I'm going to use it on some other days. There's also a needle minder in the kit. Unfortunately, at the time of filming, I didn't have it to show you, but it works really well with any stitching that you do. So let's get into the advent calendar. So let's see what's behind the door for day 4. So let's open that up, and I can see that there is a Santa on the back. He looks really cute. So I've got my dies here in a cute little parcel, and then I can open up that bag and see what dies are inside. So I've got pieces for the hat, I've got 2 pieces for his beard, and then I've got his face there, and then also some features for his face as well. I'm going to be using the Stitch Along add-on kit, so I've taken some cardstock from that kit. I have added in some Alabaster cardstock for the skin of his face. So I'm starting off with the poppy field cardstock in the kit, and I'm going to cut the hat from that. So I've got some best ever craft tape. I'm holding the die down onto the cardstock, and then I can just cut that a little bit smaller. I'm then cutting the features for his face from the pink sand cardstock in the kit, and then that Alabaster cardstock for his face. And then I'm using Snowdrift cardstock for the pieces of the hat, like the fluffy parts of the hat, and then also his beard as well. And I love that the beard comes in 2 sections, because if you didn't want to add the stitching detail to it, you could just have the beard as one whole piece. But for this, I'm going to add the stitching detail. So I've held the outside kind of die in place, and then I'm adding the inside stitching piece inside as well, and holding them both down with the best ever craft tape, and then I can place them in my Platinum 6 die cutting machine. I can pop the cutting plate on top and then run those through the machine to die cut them out. And most of the die cuts actually ended up sticking to the cutting plate, which is quite helpful, so I didn't need to try and get those out of the dies. So I've got the individual pieces here. You can see that some of them are stuck down onto the mat, and I've got my beard piece there. I do want to cut the kind of base layer of the beard again. This is so that I can add this behind the stitching piece. It's going to give a little bit of stability to it and just cover up the stitching on the back. So I'm going to run that through my die cutting machine again to cut that out. So you can see here that the eyes pop out of the face, and you could definitely do some die cut inlay for this, but this is a little bit quicker just to add a little bit of cardstock onto the back. So I'm taking the onyx cardstock in the kit, and I've cut a little piece of that. I can add some belly art glue onto the back of the face, and then I can stick that cardstock down on top. And then from the front, you can now see that his eyes are black. It's just a quicker way than having to do the die cut inlay. I can then adhere the cheeks onto his face. And the die does cut with some indentations, so you can see exactly where these pieces need to be, which is really helpful. So I can just stick the first one down and then the second one down on the other side. I can then add the kind of white fluffy bits onto the hat, so just adding some more glue down onto the die cut. And then I can pop the pieces on top. And I'm using the liquid glue today. That's just going to give me a little bit of time to wiggle them in place and try and line them up as best as possible. And then now I can do the same thing here for the pom-pom. And for my first card, I'm trying to just use the elements in the Stitch Along kit, so that if you just wanted to get the advent calendar and the kit, you could definitely make this first card. Like I say, I did add in a little bit of extra Alabaster cardstock. So I'm now taking one of the needles from the kit and also the DMC White Diamond metallic thread. This is such a pretty thread. It's white, but it's got a little bit of iridescence to it. I think it's very, very pretty. So I can just thread that through the needle. And I love these needles because they've got a blunt end to them. I'm very clumsy when it comes to stitching, so I'm really glad that I'm not going to accidentally stab myself. I can then thread that thread through the back of the die cut, and I'm going to hold that in place with some Best Ever craft tape. So just cut a little piece of that, and then I can hold that thread down, and then I don't need to worry about that kind of unraveling or anything as I'm doing my stitching. So as you can see on the die cut, there is some indentation lines so that you can see where you need to stitch. You can definitely elaborate with this. I'm just doing the basic stitch lines. So I'm just going from the top of the beard to the bottom of the beard. But you could definitely do lots of different things here if you wanted to. But I thought it'd be quite nice just to keep this card very clean and simple and just do the basic stitching. When I'm stitching, I do often die cut two of the base layer, and that just helps to accidentally prevent any warping, or if I might bend it a little bit if I get my thread caught up. But I did find with these stitches, because they're just very simple, just straight lines, I found that I didn't actually need to do this with this beard, but you could definitely do that if you wanted to. So I'm just going through all of the stitching holes here, and then I can finish off with the last one here on the right hand side. And then for the back, I'm just going to kind of thread the thread through, if that makes sense. But I realised at this point that one of the pieces kind of got caught up a little bit at the back. So it's not quite as taut as I want it to be. That's the only downside with this thread. It is a little bit more slippery. But what I can do here, as I'm adding the Best Ever craft tape onto the back to hold that thread in place, I can move that piece of thread, the one that was a little bit loose, and stick that down, and that's just going to make it look a lot nicer from the front. So just making sure that looks okay, and then I can cut off the rest of that thread. So now I've got my stitch beard, and I do think it looks really nice with that thread, and I can adhere it down onto that base layer. So I'm going to bring in the belly art glue again and just go around the outside edges. And then I do just add a little bit in the centre as well. And then I can try and line these up as best as possible. Like I say, this is going to cover the stitching on the back, but it is also going to just give it a little bit of extra stability as well. So just trying to line those up as best as possible. And then I can grab something heavy to place over the top while the glue dries. Once the glue's dried, I can add a little bit more adhesive onto the back of that, and then I can pop that down onto the face. I was trying to not get my head in the way here on camera, and so I didn't quite line it up as best as I would have liked to. So I end up just picking up the face and popping that behind, and that worked a lot better. So just lining up the beard with the top of the face there. And then because I wasn't 100% certain if the glue was going to hold it, because it's only just at the top of the beard, I'm just adding a little bit more of the Best Ever Craft tape at the back, and that's just going to make sure that everything stays in place. And then I can do the same thing for the hat. So adding the belly art glue to start with, popping that in place at the front. Making sure that I'm happy with the placement, and then I can add some more of the Best Ever Craft tape at the back. And then I missed on camera for some reason me popping in his little mouth, so I do apologise for that, but it just kind of goes under his moustache that I'm adding on top. So just using a little bit more of that liquid glue, so I've got that time to wiggle it in place. And then I can pop his nose on top, and I just think he's so adorable. So that is my little Santa complete. I can now work on my card base. So I've got a panel of white cardstock here that's cut to 6 1/4 inches by 3 1/4 inches. Usually for a mini slimline card I would do 3 1/2 inches by 6 1/2 inches, but my envelopes fitted this size, so that's what I went with today. I've taken the Happy Holidays sentiment from the exclusive stamp set in the Stitch Along add-on kit, and I'm just using the Santa there just to make sure that I've got the placement as I want it. And then I'm bringing in a piece of clear plastic so that I can stamp the sentiment down onto the plastic to start with, make sure that it's in the center and where I want it to be, so I can bring back the Santa there for the placement. And I think I'm happy with where I've stamped it, so I can remove that plastic, hold the cardstock back down with the magnet, and then I can ink up my sentiment using VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. This is a pigment ink, so it does tend to stamp really nice and crisp, but it does take a little while to dry. So just stamping that down using the mini MISTI. And then once it's dry, I can add some tape runner onto the back of this panel. So just going around the outside edges and then adding quite a bit in the centre. And then just to give me a little bit of extra wiggle room, I'm going over that with a little bit of liquid glue. And then I can adhere that down onto my card base. And so my card base is 6 1/4 inches by 3 1/4 inches. So the same size as the panel. I can just pop that in place, press that down, and then I'm just going to grab my bone folder. I like to go around the outside edges to make sure that they're really well adhered down. I can then add some foam squares onto the back of the Santa. So I'm adding a few of the larger squares, and then I do add some of the smaller ones as well, just to fill in the gaps. Then I can remove the backings off of that foam tape, and I like to use tweezers for that, it just helps me out a little bit. And then I'm also using some tweezers just to hover Santa in place before I stick him down. So just lifting up my card here just to get a better view, and then once I'm happy with the placement I can press him down. And then I wanted to keep this card really quite clean and simple, but I did just want to add a little extra embellishment. So I'm using the Fashion Oyster Pearls that come in the kit, and I'm just adding one of those onto the pom-pom of his hat. I do end up moving that a little bit later, which I will share with you once I've started on my next card. So that's the first card, just using the elements from the calendar and the advent calendar, and then also the Stitch Along add-on kit. So for the second card, I wanted to make it a little bit more colourful. So although I love the thread on the bead for the first card, I thought I would use the gold diamond thread in the kit for the second bead. And although you wouldn't necessarily have a gold bead, I thought it looked quite cool. So again, I'm just doing the same thing with the stitching. I secured it in place at the back, and then I can just go along those lines of the stitching, starting at the top of the bead and then working down to the bottom. Just starting at one end and going to the other side. And then again, I can hold that in place at the back. So just going under some of those stitches, and then I can pull the needle through, and then I can secure that in place with some of the Best Ever craft tape before I cut the thread down. And then I'm going to adhere that onto the base layer of the bead like I did before. So I've got the rest of the Santa already completed. It's the same as I did for the first card, but I thought that I would add a little bit of sparkle onto this one. So I've cut the hat pieces from some pop-up die cutting glitter foam sheets in white. And this not only is going to give me a little bit of extra sparkle on the card, it's also going to give me a little bit of extra dimension as well. So I'm just going to place those on top of the white cardstock layers. I do like to add cardstock underneath the foam sheets. I just find that it is a little bit better doing it that way. It is going to take a little bit longer for the glue to dry, but it does dry really nicely. And that is my second Santa complete. So for the card for this one, I thought that I would do a red card base, but I wanted there to be a little bit of difference between the card base and the Santa's hat. So although I'm using the same poppy field cardstock, I'm going to add a little bit of ink blending to this. So I'm taking Lumberjack Plaid Distress ink and one of the large blending brushes. You can see that the blending brush is a lot bigger than the ink pad, but it did manage to work. So I'm just going around the outside edges of this panel. This panel is the same 6¼ inches by 3¼ inches. And you're not going to see a huge amount of this colour of ink. It is very close to the colour of the cardstock, but I wanted there to be a transition colour between this colour, or the colour of the cardstock, and my darkest ink. So you can just about see it on camera. In the pictures it doesn't really show up at all either, unfortunately, but in real life I do think that this ink blending does make quite a big difference to the card. It kind of just draws your eye into the centre of the card. I'm now going in with Aged Mahogany, and I'm using one of the kind of medium-sized blending brushes for this because I don't need the colour to go as far into the centre of the panel. I just want it around the outside edges. So you can kind of just about see here on camera that it is a little bit darker around the edges. I can now darken that even further with black Soot Distress ink, but I do just want to add this to the very edges of this panel. I don't necessarily want the ink to sort of read as black, but I do just want it to be a little bit darker. So just going around the outside edge, and then I can blend everything out with that large fluffy brush. I do absolutely love these brushes. They're so fluffy and they do blend everything really nicely. You get a really nice smooth blend with them. So just adding a little bit more of that Lumberjack Plaid. And then I can adhere the panel onto my card base. So I've cut the card base from the same white cardstock that I used for the first card. So just lining that up, and then I can go around the outside edges with the bone folder. I've then added some more foam squares onto the back of Santa, and then I can pop him down onto the card. And I did kind of centre him so that there was the same amount of space on the right hand side as the left. I do end up going back in and moving him towards the right hand side slightly. I felt that once I added the sentiment on top, he didn't quite look centred enough. but for now he's staying there. I can then add my sentiment underneath, and I have heat embossed this sentiment, the same sentiment that I used on the first card, but I've heat embossed it onto white cardstock using gold embossing powder. And then I've just cut that into a strip and added some foam squares onto the back of that. And you can see here that it kind of doesn't look right. So like I say, I'm going to move him a little bit later. But I did want to just add a little bit of extra embellishment onto the card. So I have cut some holly and berries from the Parcel and Post Christmas decoration set, and although it's not traditional that Santa would have holly on his hat, I do think it looks quite cute. So I've cut the holly leaves from Peridot cardstock. I can just add those onto the hat there. And then for the berries, there's kind of like a base layer and then the separate berries that you can add on top. And I've cut those from the same poppy field cardstock. So just adding those on the centre, and then I can add the individual berries on top. And then to finish off, to add a little bit more sparkle and then also differentiate the red colours, I'm adding some Christmas red stickles on top. So just squeezing some of that out onto the berries, and then I can use something sharp just to move the stickles around. Make sure that I'm covering all of those berries. And that is the second card finished for today. As you can see, I did move him slightly towards the right hand side, but I did miss that off camera, but I managed to just about pick him up and move him across. And I did also move that pearl over towards the right hand side on the first card as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts on which one you prefer, whether you like the more clean and simple one on the white card base, or you like the more colourful one and embellished one on the red card base. Links to the products that I used will be listed in the description bar on YouTube and also over on my blog. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.